Merci à tous de participer à ce processus depuis 117 semaines maintenant. Dennis Speed et Dennis Small seront les co-modérateurs de cette réunion. Je rappelle, comme d'habitude, que nous avons créé cette coalition dans le but de réunir l'ensemble du mouvement de la paix internationale pour les rassembler autour d'un but commun, c'est-à-dire la paix, quelle que soit leur idéologie politique, leur religion, leurs croyances, etc., les pays dont ils sont ressortissants. Nous avons assisté ces dernières semaines à des événements tout à fait tumultueux. Donc, j'aimerais vous inviter à partager avec des amis, avec la famille, etc., ce lien pour pouvoir participer à nos délibérations toutes les semaines. Nous allons entendre maintenant un briefing international de la part de Madame Helga Zepp-LaRouche, la fondatrice de l'Institut Schiller et celle qui a lancé la Coalition internationale pour la paix.
It is very difficult to determine where one should start.
Bonjour à vous tous. Il est difficile de choisir où commencer car la situation stratégique est vraiment pleine d'endroits très dangereux qui pourraient hors de et de commencer que la question la plus urgente passe, il ne reste peu de temps à Gaza où le génocide continue et là l'offensive contre la ville de Gaza par l'armée israélienne a commencé et la communauté internationale est absolument impuissante. Elle n'agit pas. Nous arrivons au moment où il va y avoir l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies et c'est probablement la dernière chance de faire quelque chose pour arrêter cela. L'opération militaire contre la Palestine occupée, ce n'est pas une guerre. Ce n'est pas une guerre où Israël a déclaré la guerre aux Palestiniens. L'Israël est la force occupante dans un une très petit territoire qui s'appelle Gaza. Et c'est incroyable. Et je pense que nous devons savoir que si la communauté mondiale se rend incapable d'agir face à un génocide, ça ne veut pas dire potentiellement la mort de plus de 2 millions de Palestiniens. Je pense que c'est aussi la fin de la civilisation, si on peut l'appeler civilisation après ça. C'est la dernière chance, donc. Le 18 septembre, ce sera au milieu de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, eh bien, il y aura la fin pour quelque chose qui a été qui a été décidé par l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, et Israël devait se mettre en accord avec ce qu'avait dit la Cour internationale de justice, ou alors plus de mesures peuvent être adoptées par l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies. Cela ouvre une fenêtre d'opportunité, car bien sûr, Israël n'a pas du tout répondu à ces demandes. Les États-Unis ont soutenu tout ce que Israël faisait. Les pays occidentaux n'ont vraiment absolument rien fait de substantiel pour intervenir. Et cela veut dire que tout ce qui existe, c'est faire d'aller dans la résolution des Nations Unies qui qui dit que si le Conseil permanent des Nations Unies est bloqué par veto d'un des membres ou de plusieurs des membres face à une situation très grave, l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies peut directement décider de faire une action pour aller au-delà de ça. Elle doit spécifier quelles mesures doivent être prises, incluant est-ce qu'il doit y être envoyé des forces, des casques bleus ou d'une autre force militaire. Ça dépend bien sûr des discussions à l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies. Et une majorité de 2 tiers, à une majorité de 2 tiers, ils peuvent décider d'envoyer une telle force. Il y a toutes sortes de propositions qui sont amenées, certaines qui ne fonctionneront pas, et il est discuté d'une solution à deux, de reconnaître la Palestine, la solution à 2 États. Ça ne suffira pas. Il y a Francesca Albanese parlé. Il sans manque de on demande de faire plutôt que le rapporteur de l'ONU pour les Nations, pour les droits humains, des actions. Donc je suggérerais que nous discutions de cela et que nous mobilisions la coalition internationale des Nations Unies pour mettre en place la résolution United for Peace. Donc, comme je l'ai dit, c'est probablement la dernière chance que nous ayons, car si nous attendons plus longtemps, la majorité des gens en Palestine seront mortes ou simplement transportées vers une petite zone quelque part dans un camp, quelque chose comme un camp de concentration. C'est un nettoyage ethnique est aujourd'hui à l'ordre du jour. C'est mon premier point. Note que rapport à son histoire de Riviera. Et je voudrais redire, si la communauté mondiale échoue à agir là-dessus, je pense que nous perdons tout. Nous ne sommes pas juste menacés de perdre le peuple palestinien. Nous perdons la capacité qui intervient comme si cela était. Je pense que cette situation, comme nous l'avons discuté la semaine dernière, où le professeur Postol a mis de l'avant cet avertissement extrême, il est l'expert et il a réitéré cela. Il a la connaissance absolue, il n'y a aucun doute à propos de ce qu'il dit. Et il dit que en gros, l'Iran a assez de matériel, de ressources nucléaires pour soit ils ont déjà maintenant des armes nucléaires, soit ils pourraient les avoir dans quelques semaines, peut-être quelques jours. Il dit que nous avons donc 2 puissances nucléaires non déclarées au Moyen-Orient. Et pour rendre les choses pires, les trois Européens, la Grande-Bretagne et la France, ont activé quelque chose qui s'appelle SNAP, qui est l'idée de restituer le régime des sanctions qui a été abandonné après les accords sur le nucléaire iranien et qui donnait donc il donne à l'Iran 30 jours pour autoriser à nouveau l'Agence internationale à l'énergie atomique pour inspecter à nouveau ce qu'il reste de leur matériel nucléaire. Et la réponse, bien sûr, du gouvernement iranien a été négative. Ils ont dit qu'il n'y a aucune raison de croire qu'il y ait une quelconque légitimité là-dedans, car la dernière fois qu'ils ont coopéré et on les a trahis, les Nations Unies, les États-Unis négociaient avec, l'Iran, tout en, d'un autre côté, préparant l'attaque. Donc, une raison de que ces questions soient vraies. Le gouvernement russe, en la personne de Dmitry Polyansky, a dénoncé cette méthode qu'il appelle la coercition des Européens. Les Iraniens disent qu'ils n'ont aucune crédibilité. Qui veut écouter les Européens alors qu'ils n'ont pas été capables d'intervenir face à l'attaque américaine? Polyansky dit qu'il y a deux façons d'agir face à ces questions. C'est qu'il y a la diplomatie et l'autre, en fait, qui est l'inverse, les attaques. Et le régime des sanctions a causé la mort. Voilà, cet autre modèle, c'est le chantage. Et donc, ces sanctions abaissent le niveau de vie de la population et les gens meurent de faim, meurent par manque aussi de médecine, de médicaments. Et donc, la ligne, donc il y a une ligne, ils donnent les Européens, la France, l'Allemagne et la Grande-Bretagne 30 jours. C'est une situation donc très dangereuse. Pour donc mentionner un autre sujet qui est important, c'est l'arrestation du coordinateur, celui qui est censé être le coordinateur soi-disant coordinateur du sabotage de Nord Stream, euh, qui est censé opération de ça et dit que les 7 qui ont participé à cette opération ont été tous identiques. L'un est mort à bataille en Ukraine, les autres sont connus, leur identité est connue. Cette histoire, je pense, est extrêmement douteuse. Il y a de nombreux experts dans le monde, dans de nombreux pays, qui doutent totalement que cette opération très sophistiquée ait pu être être faite depuis un petit bateau. C'est complètement ridicule. La Russie, la Chine et d'autres pays ont demandé une enquête indépendante.
What this was. Now, this is not just a terrorist attack, but
Ce n'est pas juste une que le Nord Stream changé la donne amené aussi à l'ordre économique complet de l'Allemagne, l'Europe, et ça a été le début de la séparation géopolitique de l'Europe et de la Russie, cela dans le bénéfice complet des États-Unis. Ça a été fait pendant l'administration Biden. Maintenant, les Européens achètent du gaz un des prix 3 fois supérieur au prix au gaz qu'ils achetaient à la Russie. Donc, je peux vous dire, France est en bon, 8 membres qui vote non confiance pour Biden. La confiance donc est perdue. Il y aura peut-être des nouvelles élections. Soit donc voilà. Il peut aussi avoir une démission de Macron et des élections présidentielles. En tout cas, il n'y a pas de gouvernement stable et l'économie française est aussi en chute libre, peut-être encore plus, de manière plus dramatique. C'est le cas de l'Allemagne, des banqueroutes, le taux de chômage explose et pendant l'hiver, nous aurons un effort complet de l'Allemagne et des économies européennes en général. C'est le résultat du sabotage de Nord Stream 2. Et donc, nous devons absolument demander que les demandes de la Russie en particulier, mais aussi de la Chine, qui a insisté que si cette question de terrorisme sur Nord Stream n'est pas enquêtée sérieusement, par une enquête indépendante sérieuse, eh bien, aucune infrastructure ne sera en sécurité dans le monde. Cette enquête indépendante est donc nécessaire. L'Allemagne, en particulier, va à grande vitesse. La coalition des volontaires ne laisse pas tomber leurs intentions de laisser continuer la guerre en Ukraine. Ils ont clairement perdu sur le champ de bataille, mais il y a des développements incroyables et très grands qui ont lieu. Il y a eu une réunion du cabinet allemand dans le ministère de la Défense, dans une pièce qui s'appelle la Chambre des sous-marins, car elle est complètement isolée et donc on ne peut pas... Elle est protégée contre la surveillance. Pourquoi nous se rencontrent là? Il y a le commandant c'est seulement là, ces suppositions qu'il aurait discuter quand ce genre de réunion a lieu. Il faut être très inquiet, car l'armement, après les plans opérationnels pour réarmer l'Allemagne et réarmer les esprits, l'armée va dans les écoles, ils essayent de convaincre les enfants de rejoindre l'armée. Il y a un discours sur 10 ans la Russie c'est la situation. Il y a quelque chose à lieu, c'est dans la majorité globale, heureusement. Demain commence la réunion de la coopération de Shanghai à Chongqing en Chine, où le Premier ministre Modi va probablement rencontrer Xi Jinping, en profiter. Il y aura de nombreux pays qui vont participer et le président Trump n'ira peut-être pas là-bas, ce que nous avons essayé d'évoquer par notre appel. Il ne semble pas qu'il y aille, mais peut-être qu'il pourrait avoir le prix Nobel, car il a fait en sorte que l'Inde et la Chine se rapprochent en attaquant les deux. C'est donc dans cette ronde de l'action de Shanghai, ils vont présenter leur plan stratégique qu'ils font de projet économique autour de 3 grades.
I'm sorry,
Recording in
Putin will be
progress.
the guest of honor at that. I mixed it up before. So that will be a very, very important demonstration. And at the same day, on September 3rd, the Vladivostok East Economic Forum will also start, where one of the main topics is the development of the Arctic. And one already knows more than 6,000 firms will be there. Many countries of the global south will see their chance to invest together with Russia and others to develop the kinds of raw materials which they are very poor of. And if Germany had if the leadership were still in the realm of sanity, they would say, let's cooperate with Russia because Germany has no raw materials, and we need to develop such secure raw materials in cooperation with Russia and the BRICS. I'm not sure that such sane statements will come, at least not at this moment. So, but this will be hopefully a place where the continuation of the potential of building the Bering Strait between Alaska and Eurasia will be also on the table. At least we will try everything we can to make sure that it's being discussed. Of economic basis for these new security and development architecture, which must be of interest of every single country on the planet. So, as you can see, the severe and acute on that, a way is for the West join easy to be. So that's my initial report.
Thank you, Helga, for that. And I just want to encourage people who are in the audience, because we will get to the discussion period after the opening panel, but discussing the UN Uniting for Peace resolution, just want to encourage people to hop on and give their thoughts on how we can get this out and report back on what you think we could do. So I just want to encourage that during the discussion. But thank you, Helga, for that. Next, I'd like to bring in Professor Toloraya, who is the executive director of the Russian National Committee on BRICS Research, the director of the Asian Strategy Center, Institute of Economics, and the chief researcher of the Institute of China and Contemporary Asia of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And thank you so much for joining us. I know you've been very busy in between all these meetings happening in Russia, so we appreciate you hopping on today.
Yes, thank you. I'm leaving tomorrow, so I'm a bit busy, but I welcome today's meeting, which is very important because it comes on the eve of another even more important meeting, which is in fact crucial and maybe a milestone in the global politics. I'm talking about the meeting in Beijing and in Tianjin, which is there to convene the leaders of SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That's more or less a routine thing, but it's of special significance now because a new declaration will be adopted concerning the approaches of the what exists, but at least a comprehensive vision of how these Eurasian countries, a dozen so Eurasian countries, see the security challenges and how to address them. So it's important. And even more important is the meeting in Beijing to celebrate the end of the Second World War, which ended with the defeat of the Imperial Japan. And China hosts this meeting along with 24 of other leaders of countries, mostly from the global south. It is important that we have both Russian, Chinese, and Indian leaders there. That these measures have brought together India and China for a long time, say not very kind to each other, but now they have overcome the differences, and that's what separates them. Partly this is due to President Trump's policies of tariffs and his desire to force India to stop purchasing Russian oil, and India have reacted very harshly and instead decided not only to continue to import Russian oil, but also to bridge the gap with China. And this is one of the first times for a long time that Indian leader goes to China. So we'll have a real manifestation of this unity of the global South countries, headed by this big troika, China, Russia, and India, who will show their unity in confronting the current challenges. And the current challenge is, in fact, the separation of the world into two blocks. One, the so-called collective West, that's G7 plus several more supporters, and actually all the others. This Western bloc is becoming more and more aggressive, and I'm really concerned with what's going on in Europe. US President Trump's have changed his position. The Alaska meeting with President Putin was very important for trying to overcome the differences and to find some solution for the Ukrainian peace. However, it looks as if European countries, EC countries, are very much against any peaceful solution or against any solution. This is not just a temporary phenomenon. What is more dangerous is that the European countries somehow decided that the future for them is the war against Russia. They're gearing up their military industry. They're introducing new military programs as if they're going to go to war against Russia altogether with no particular reason. And as I've said, this is a long-term policy. And even if we find a solution of some kind in Ukraine, I don't think this policy may stop unless we have a total change in the mind of the political elites and the regimes in Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and I don't see this happening anytime soon. So Ukrainian issue is not something temporary which can be overcome in a short run. There will be lots of troubles ahead, and although we may finally find a solution to Ukrainian conflict, that doesn't mean that the conflicts won't erupt on other areas surrounding Russia. So it looks like the battle for dominance of the West against the rest, and I really don't know what to do with it, how it can be changed. The world is, of course, undergoing transition from unipolar world to multipolar, polycentric world, where the strength, first of all, economic strength and competitive strength of new emerging power centers is growing. This is just growing by violence from the West. The West is trying to overcome this tendency to keep down the root cause of current turmoil in the global scale. Of course, the current U.S. administration policies seem to more reasonable, but we understand pretty well that the deep state or the political class of U.S. are still deeply concerned with keeping the dominance and conflicting with China and Russia as their principal enemies and competitors, one economically, one military. So there's no guarantee that after President Trump term in office will end this way or other, that the policy get new impulse, new the Bering Strait, which could symbolize the connection between Russia and the US, may be symbolic. But I don't think that we may have time enough to do this before the winds will blow other way in the US. And even if they start such a construction, I'm not sure it will be finished. Therefore, I said that the situation is still very concerning. Maybe we have stepped back a little bit from the term nuclear war, which might have this year, but still we haven't gone far from the threshold, and we can get there back, unfortunately, very quickly and quite unexpectedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Toloraya. I know you've been very busy, and this was actually a very important, useful intervention that you're making on what's happening. I wanted to see, Helga, if you had a response before we continued. I think if I heard right, you might have to leave soon.
No, I think Professor Toloraya, you unfortunately expressed the picture as it is, and I think that the only hope is that the voice of the global majority speaks out at these three events, you know, the SCO, and the Beijing 80 years commemoration of the Second World War in Vladivostok, and that the collective voice of the global South, which happens to be the global majority, is being heard loudly in the collective West, because it is still my hope and conviction that the only way how we will get out of this danger would be that more reasonable forces in Europe and in the United States just say, let's end this geopolitical game, which can only lead to the destruction of all of humanity. Problems could be. Maybe you can. What you in that.
Thank you, Helga. We don't see any signs that the way of thinking may change, because, as I've said, the way of thinking is based on very egoistic interests. That the 1 billion of the Western citizens, the so-called gold billion, they live by exploiting all the others, or the other 7 billion people. And this is based on the economic system, which is based on the financial system created after the Second World War, which led to an economy if it stops, I think the whole base system will be changed, and that will mean disaster for the Western economies, because they're producing very little these days, and the physical production, the physical economy have moved elsewhere, while the vast part of Western countries are just parasiting on it. So these are the fundamental issues which determine the attempts of the West to keep their domination, to keep the dominance of the rest of the world, and it cannot be changed by the more it will end the scope for Putin.
But I'd like to answer that briefly. I think you need a little bit more differentiated analysis, because the golden billion is not a homogeneous group. the governments, which are the warmongers right now in the coalition of the willing, have a support will one part is a majority, and the reality is that because of the dramatic collapse, the vast majority of people will absolutely lose everything. Merz just said, that the present German economy cannot maintain the social welfare state. That means they will go for massive cuts, which will ruin the livelihood of many, many people. And that's why I'm saying that if there would be a clear offer coming from the global majority of cooperation, like joint ventures in the development of Africa, joint ventures in the development of the Far East, whereby it is becoming clear to the majority of the people of Europe that that there is another way, because people don't want to go to war. It's just that when they only hear the mainstream media, then they are despairing. And I can tell you, people in Germany and France are quite desperate. It's desperate. So I think intervention, it's elite are, like you say, was black Germany for many years, and he obviously has more the interest of the military-industrial complex in mind than the oath he swore to defend the common good of the people. But I think that there is much more room for intervention, which is what we should concentrate on.
Yes, Helga, I would like to be as hopeful, and of course, I even personally believe that God lives in. But he had many hopes. For example, when President Trump, at least through manifestation of democracy, he was genuinely elected by the people who wanted some change, and he tried to provide, he tried to deliver on his promises. But so far, what we see is that there's not much is being achieved, and I don't know when and how it will be achieved. So even if the people would express their will in a quite rigid and quite sincere manner, that doesn't necessarily mean that even a new government, another political force, will implement their will. That's why I sound maybe a bit more pessimistic than you are, but I would like it to be right.
I think we have to work on it harder.
Yeah, I think it's a good goal to have. Well, is there any more like to discuss through with? Otherwise, we can continue with the.
I said enough.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Toloraya, for your insights and your perspective. It's actually good for other people, especially Westerners here, to hear from your thoughts in Russia.
Sorry for
and what the Russians
being
are
a bit
thinking.
too blatant. I'm not speaking on behalf of Russian
No,
government.
absolutely not. No,
Russian
but
majority.
yes, but it's still very useful to hear. So I'd like to continue and bring in Graham Fuller, who's a former U.S. diplomat, former CIA official, and Islamic scholar for the discussion to continue this process. Do we have you on, Graham? else.
Good. And thank you, Nastasia. It's always a pleasure to see you and bringing these but
Recording
today
in
I'd like to
progress.
talk a little more briefly, come back to the problem of Russia. And I mean, one always begins with Ukraine, but as we know, Ukraine is just the symptom of a much deeper malaise and crisis between the U.S. and Russia, or now increasingly and sadly even Europe and Russia, for reasons that are not entirely clear, but I'll talk about that a bit. Anyway, it's not Ukraine. So Ukraine is not the issue. There are lots and lots of fine specialists who talk about this all the time, and I listen to them as well myself and learned a great deal. But we also know that Russia and Putin in particular has talked about the need for a broader European security arrangement that would include the security interests of all parties and not just simply Western Europe or Ukraine or others, but all parties, which would obviously include Russia. As people have pointed out, if my security becomes ever and ever stronger, your security becomes ever and ever weaker. So there's no, it's not a zero-sum game. I'd like to talk also. I'm very excited by the Schiller Institute's idea of this land bridge in the Bering Straits, because I think it's a highly creative idea and always obviously goes back some time in the Schiller Institute's thinking, and perhaps Lyndon LaRouche as well. It's a terrific idea, and obviously the idea that it would be this massive link between Eurasia and the North American continent is quite extraordinary. I sadly do not believe that the economic arguments for it, which are powerful and exciting and original, I sadly believe that the political barriers at this point still would tend to block it, and particularly in the United States. I can see people talking about building this bridge, and suddenly you're going to have communists rushing through the tunnels into Alaska or something like that. Believe me, people will be talking like that. So I think what we need to get more deeply into the problem of Russophobia in the United States, which is very, very deep. But first of all, we have to, as always, thank our British Russophobia period of the Himalayan mountains and invading the British Empire in India. Well, that's where it started, and it's gotten it. Then there's the inordinate fear of communism, as somebody once called it. There are many grounds for this. Unfortunately, at this point, I think the United States has gotten itself very deeply into a mindset of Russophobia that it does not see an easy answer out of it. We all know that, particularly after the Ukrainian war began, that the United States in particular began this process of literally culturally cleansing the United States. What the Russian danger or surround terms of ballerinas and musicians and kinds of to keep the United States pure, as it were. Well, that can be turned around. There's no reason why a lot of this can't be turned around. And I would think, frankly, one thing, and Ray and I had talked about this at some time in the past, but it seems very much to me that the one single figure in the United States, more recent modern U.S. history, who enjoys a magnificent reputation in the United States among most people, and that is the President Ronald Reagan. We know he was a very genial man. He but at least in the United States, return and revitalize the image of Reagan. His wonderful smile, his handshakes with Gorbachev, all of these things, which would show that a great patriot, a great American, blah, blah, all of those things that Ronald Reagan stands for, actually himself was a proponent of getting along with Russia. I think that would have a great deal of leverage in the United States, and particularly even in the MAGA groups who admire him also. So that's one thing. At least identify Reagan as the poster boy for better relations with the United States. Secondly, and we're getting down into the weeds here, and I'm sure there are lots of other people, including Ray, who will have things to offer on this, but maybe trying to reverse this cultural ethnic cleansing, we might invite Russian institutions, whatever they might be, universities, to come and help and establish and invest in new centers of studies for Russian studies that would include not just communism versus capitalism and all that tired stuff, but also the great traditions of Russian history, and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and Russian Christianity, which has a deep, deep tradition. I think this could be made very appealing if it could be allowed to come back. But right now, Russophobia absolutely blocks all this, which sadly, I think blocks as well the path to a very enlightened new path through Alaska and the Bering Straits. If we come to Europe very briefly, first of all, I think I've said this before, I think Europe is in a very state of deep crisis. Helga has said this repeatedly and knows it better than I do. I see Russia, I'm sorry, I see Europe, excuse me, as very much at this point entirely hors de combat. I don't mean that literally, because Europe is desperately trying to get into combat as much as it can in Europe, but it's meaningless, except symbolically. And as so many more serious military commentators than I have pointed out, that once the U.S. pulls out, the game is over, and the idea of Europe doing anything further is impossible. But what is wrong with Europe? Why has Europe signed on to all of this? One is Germany, which was
Recording in progress.
And it occupied and dominated Eastern Europe. These three countries, East Germany, Slovakia, and Hungary today, are among the most favorably disposed towards to working with Russia. Why is that? I think that's a very fascinating phenomenon. They know the perils of Russia as well as anybody. So I think one other fact, it's not the first time I or others have mentioned it, but it's really worth repeating all the time. Russia has in fact invaded the West, Western Europe, twice. The first time was when Napoleon around 1820 invaded Russia, burnt down Moscow, and then Russia drove Napoleon back out and all the way back into Europe and cooperated with the Europeans to put an end to the Napoleonic Empire at that time. That was Russia's first invasion. I'm chasing out Napoleon. The second time, Hitler invaded Europe and destroyed Moscow, and it took 25 million Russian lives to drive Hitler's Germany out, but they finally did. But at that point, Stalin chose to stay in Western Europe, as we all know, for a very long time, and that was not a pretty picture that I'm sure Europe unfortunately does remember. But both times, Soviet and Russian presence in Europe was due to Western invasions, prompted by literal Western invasions, not just NATO expansion or something, literal Western invasions. All right, so I'm not way out of it. I think the fact that Russia very part European community, I think it's very possible. And God knows when Europe will decide that actually they're living next to Eurasia, and Eurasia is the rising world power through BRICS and SCO and other forces. Is Europe going to cut itself off and remain this tiny little Atlanticist island, clinging to the US, which is in itself sinking in so many terms of national power and cultural power? Is that what Europe is choosing? I find this quite incredible, but I have hopes that, as Helga has talked about, change is underway, maybe imminently in Russia. I'm sorry, in Germany and in France, and hopefully in the UK. So that's pretty much what I have to say on this. I think there is clear room for cooperation with Russia and indeed with China as well. But when the atmosphere is ideologically poisoned, then it is extremely difficult to speak of practical and even innovative ideas for cooperation that are simply shoved away, pushed aside by the hardliners in the United States and in Europe. But there is hope. The folly, the foolishness, the insanity of where Europe now stands in all of this cannot last. That's my hope in any case. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham, for your for your insights into the process. It's very useful, as always, to have your input onto what's happening. So thank you very much for that. And the hope for the change in Europe can't happen a moment too soon. It's for their own sake that this has to happen. But as they say, there is an end to the tyrant's power. So it is coming up to that point, I believe. So thank you. I'd like to bring in Ray McGovern, who I'm sure many of you know is a regular on the International Peace Coalition. He's a former CIA analyst, co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and a wonderful interventionist. So please go ahead, Ray. Welcome.
Thank you, Anastasia. Can I be heard?
Loud and clear.
Good. Okay. Well, I just have to thank Graham for his tour d'horizon. It was really good, and it points out why Graham was one of my superiors way back when. Graham was in the position often as acting Tulsi Gabbard, okay? You got that? In other words, head of the whole National Intelligence Council at that time, which was the predecessor before Congress created the National Intelligence Director and so forth. So I just have to say that Graham was looking long term, and he was talking to various directors. And I should probably say that we were contemporaries from the beginning, starting in 1963. But as we became more senior, I would be briefing Director Casey at 11:30 in the morning about what the president's daily brief bring in terms of reaction from the vice president, secretary of state, and so forth. And Graham would be talking to Bill Casey in the afternoon about the wider problems, like the ones that he just so well elucidated. So that's just to put a little point on that. Now, in my view, Graham summed it up nicely at the end: is there is hope. Okay. Now, why is there hope? There is hope because Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi are in no rush. They see that what the old Soviets used to call the world correlation of forces had shifted in a tectonic way toward the majority, toward those you will see watching the parade on the 3rd or the 2nd of September, just a few days from now. It's just a metaphor that won't quit. Look at all the people who are there. Look at the people who are not there. Look at the Westerners. As far as I know, only the Slovakia, Hungary, and I think the Serbia people are from the West. The rest are all the majority of the rest of the world. The good news, once again, is that not only Xi, he comes from a civilization that has never been in a hurry, right? I'm convinced that Xi would be left to his own devices if we didn't provoke him. Why do we provoke him? Because we need to build ships and we need to build all kinds of aircraft and so forth. And Taiwan is a really good place to sell the stuff. Come on, okay? So in my view, Xi is in a waiting game. He can wait. His attitude and China's attitude has always been, can't we just get along? I mean, like, how about a win-win? Okay, that's my view on China. Putin is the same way, except he's got real problems on his hands from the coalition of what shall we call them? Well, I used to call them the coalition of the lemmings. Okay, but they're lemmings without any. I mean, they don't know who to follow now. For God's sake, the U.S. Daddy. You'll remember that the Secretary General of NATO called Trump Daddy at the last NATO summit. Oh, Daddy's here. Well, Daddy turns out to be what's the word? A deadbeat. For those of you who don't know what a deadbeat, that's a guy who doesn't pay child support. Okay, so Daddy is there, but he doesn't pay child support. And if you need any further reflection of this, look at what Vice President Vance said. We're done with Ukraine. We're not going to give it any more support. So these lemmings don't have a master lemming. And I just don't know, that's where the problem, and it doesn't matter what I think about the Germans, so well, they're 5 years. It counts and associate, and to some degree, the Germans. Now, some of you may not. Graham joined the agency in 1963. There was a Glavny Vrak, okay, a main enemy, and that was the Soviet Union, okay? And their main enemy was the United States of America. Guess what? After all those years, just this year, earlier this year, the main enemy changed for Russia, formerly the Soviet Union. Guess who it is now? You guessed it, Germany. We've been there before. We've had people like Merz before. I mean, Merz just told his own people that social programs, the things that made us comfortable, the social programs, the social democracy. Well, we're going to have to pull in our belts here. That's not going to be possible because we got to build our military strength. I mean, if I'm Putin looking at that, I'm saying, oh my God. Now, despite all that, I think Putin sort of says, well, I'll play a perspicacious, a waiting game here. I think there's hope with Trump. Now, don't take my word for it. Every now and then, Putin says this explicitly. Exactly 1 week ago, he was talking to a group of young scientists. And I have to quote what he said. He was asked about relations between Russia and the United States. And he said, well, let's see, translate this. Okay, with respect to relations with the US, they are extremely low level, okay? But I've talked a lot about this in the past, and now this is the Russian. Но с приходом президента Трампа, я думаю, такой свет в конце туннеля. Свет, light, туннеля, tunnel. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, now this is just a week ago with Trump making all these other crazy proclamations and back and forth about how he's going to defeat Russia. Well, what I'm trying to say is the Kremlin is biding its time. It's got the majority. It's got Big Brother Xi, for God's sake. It's got everybody pretty much everybody in the global South. So what he's saying here, I'll translate. In all this, with the arrival of Presidenta Trumpa, I think there's such a thing as there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Well, wow. Now, was that reported anywhere? I haven't seen that reported anywhere. You have to watch these things. You have to listen. You have to read them, okay? Nobody does that anymore except Graham and I. So what does it mean? Well, is he delusionary? No, I think he really believes that Trump is going to be around 3 more years, that there's a reasonable prospect that they can work out something on Ukraine, the more so since J.D. Vance has said, we're out of there. Would done Ukraine. I want to go because Graham pretty much said it all. It's easy for me. I'll just say that what happens in Beijing and with the Shanghai Cooperation Group, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for how the correlation of forces has changed. How now it's not only 2 against 1 with Russia and China against the US. It's 3 against 1. We've succeeded in alienating India so much that they'd prefer to deal with China rather than deal with us. And it's a very artful diplomacy if you want to scupper the United States of America. So, big thing here is that Mounts is a real threat. And I would just say that the Russians just sent the signal. 2 years ago, we had an intercept between Luftwaffe generals. They're communicating with each other. One was in the Far East. Somebody intercepted, I don't know who, okay? And they said, oh my God, the Taurus, when you're briefing the Minister of Defense, please tell them that the Taurus, we need to have Germans in there to make that work. And so, that's a big step. You want Germans in Ukraine? Oh my God, that's awful. Well, what's happened now? The Germans said, well, that is a little dangerous. And so we'll build a factory in Ukraine and we'll assemble the Taurus there. We'll have a couple of advisors, but, and then that will fool the Russians. What did the Russians do last week? They obliterated, pardon the term, this factory that was building a Taurus missile. Now they can do that. And my fear is that if the Germans and the US go ahead with this deal, this bilateral deal outside of NATO, whereby the US will reintroduce intermediate nuclear capable missiles into Germany, I think that something like what happened to the Taurus factory might happen in Germany itself. And do I think that the Germans will be appealing to the US at that time? I think that certainly they will. Then we'll see if Article 5 of the NATO Treaty really is in effect, whether Wiesbaden, to protect Wiesbaden or retaliate for Wiesbaden, requires to sacrifice Detroit or New York or, God forbid, Raleigh, North Carolina. Okay. So anyhow, things are in flux, things are in change. The good news is that we have gradualists in Beijing and in Moscow and in New Delhi. The switch in forces is just won't quit. And I want to finish here just by saying that when the Russians numbers, okay, and they do, they have a lot of people that are with the sea change, far be that most Russians consider the Glavny, the main enemy, to be Germany now. Well, that's no good for anybody. We know what that. No, we know what happened last time. So do the Russians. They're not going to put up.
Recording in progress.
Light at the end of the tunnel, which he did exactly 1 week ago. He knows the history. He knows how people misused that during Vietnam. So he's going out on a limb here, okay? He's saying, I believe Putin, Putin, I believe that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, metaphorically, once again, there is a tunnel under discussion. That's the one under the Bering Strait. So there's lots of play here. Again, I see a cup not only half full, but I see a cup 3/4 full, not only after Alaska, the summit there, but also as a result of this manifestation of the whole rest of the world is against you, Mr. Trump. Come to terms, be sensible, listen to Witkoff, don't listen to these other crazies. They'll just get you in a peck of trouble. And I'll finish with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. So, yeah, thank you. Very important to but I wanted to, because we definitely have people who are sending in lots of messages, lots of happening right now. I wanted to go to Helga real quick and Graham and Ray, you guys wanted to add anything for the discussion before we moved on?
Well, I have a better part with an optimist, and I, in that sense, agree with you, Ray, that, you know, if you look at the long arc of history, it bends towards progress and justice. If we do this beautiful humanity capable of, if you think in incredibly beautiful things used, all the pieces of art in China, in India, in Persia, in Europe, you know, I mean, there is something about human beings which is, you know, making them capable of facing every challenge. I mean, having said that, I however think that we are in a short-term, extremely dangerous situation because, you know, I mean, this idea that the Russians are now saying that the Fourth Reich is reappearing in Germany and Europe. I mean, it's extremely worrisome. I mean, anybody who considers what happened in World War II, you know, should really have sleepless nights over that thing. And I was talking with a contact earlier today, and I said, I'm a political battle horse. I've been in politics now for a very long time, but still I cannot understand what is driving these people to for no good reason risk the existence of our country. And then this person basically said, well, maybe it is that these people are bored, that they have some advantage from what they do, and that weighs more than their consideration for the well-being of the country in the long term. I don't know, it's still, if you know, what does it help you if you get riches, if everything is being destroyed in the end? And I think there are many Russians who even wrote books, that if Germany continues on its present course, it will be wiped out. And all nuclear consider they have been reporting that. So I think we must make, and therefore I welcome what both Professor Toloraya and Graham, what you are saying, and Ray, you have to shout loud into Germany, because I think especially Russians and Americans and people from the outside have to make themselves heard, so that maybe some of these Germans who are sleepwalking right now are waking up. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Professor Toloraya, if you are still there, you're welcome to jump in too before we continue to the discussion period.
Yes, if I may. Well, I really enjoyed Dr. McGovern's talk and Helga's comment. And if she doesn't understand, then I feel myself less stupid, because if you don't understand what's happening to Germany, to Europeans in general, then how can we understand? We in Russia have no idea of attacking Europe or conquering Europe. What for? And we don't know where this strange idea come from and how they were implanted into the Europeans' mind. But it is there, and we think that's well, we cannot do anything about it. We have just to take this into consideration, have to react, and this is the spiral which can go on further and further and end up in a conflict. That's very dangerous, and I really don't know what to do about it.
Oh, go ahead, Helga.
To you, Professor Toloraya, I mean, in Germany, there are more and more people waking up. We have demonstrations on the 1st of September, which is the World Peace Day, because this was the outbreak of World War II. And then we have a demonstration, I think, on the 13th of September, another one on the 3rd of October. This is supposed to be the big one. And, I think if President Putin would simply send a message to these peace demonstrations in Germany and say that they to put such a thing, it would East would go absolutely on, they don't believe the NATO narrative at all, because they know they have a completely different social uprising under the
recording in progress.
Spiral of escalation, which will end in a catastrophe.
Well, may Ed, I don't think that, of course, it's possible, but I don't think it helped, because, well, thanks to propaganda, Putin for Europeans a sort of devil in flesh. You know, who's going to believe it? You don't believe ordinary people who say, "Well, we Russians, we would love to, you know, to go to Europe, to spend our hard-earned petrodollars or gas euros, or in Bierstube, in restaurants, and buying German Mercedes Benzes and Audis, but." You sanctioned us. You don't want us to do this. Okay, we'll survive, but this is our real desire, and we lived quite in a good manner for 20 years. Now it all gone to ashes, and I don't know why.
But we have to conspire more.
Okay, okay. We can write letters, we can produce stories, but I don't think that Europeans tend to believe it. That's a problem.
Well, I think this idea of addressing the people themselves is actually very interesting, because the leadership is really what's been the big problem, the so-called people who are in there who are being controlled. But the general population, I can say from personal experience, I was in Berlin organizing in the streets, and people were scared to say what they really thought. But when you talk to them in private, they're like, how do we stop this? Like, none of these people represent us. What do we do? And so meeting the Schiller Institute and people like us in the streets, it was almost like a smack to the face, or a smack of breath of fresh air or something. Like, oh my God, actually somebody I can talk to about what I really think. It was almost too good to be true for many of them. I think that at least with the Germans, what I got a sense of is that if they had an idea that they could act to do something, that there was something more to free them, then they could actually do more. I don't think I don't believe that the representation that you're seeing right now actually represents what the people think. So if there was an address from Russia to these demonstrations, that actually might have a very big effect. Just
Anastasia, you know, well, I said I've got my daughter who is Russian, but she lived most of her life in a German language milieu, and she's very skeptical to what I'm saying. You know, he said, "Well, we are Russia is backward, and we are aggressive, so that's why Europeans are afraid of Russians." And what can I do?
Oh, Ray, I see you have a. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah. Can I be heard? I can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Doesn't that personify the problem? I too am back from a week in Germany. It's the media. It's the media that has indoctrinated so many people, both in Germany and in I traveled through Germany, speaking at several cities. The last one was at the Schiller Institute program there that Anastasia just referred to in Berlin. What I noticed was that everyone was under the influence of the media, except for those who would very, very quietly say, "Oh yeah, we have to do something about it." The media in Germany is worse than the media in the United States.
No.
It's as bad as the media in Britain. Now, let me give you, well, let's see. Yeah. Let me just say one more thing. That Russia has this States President Biden, he lied. The Russians, they invaded. I find a
Recording
lighter
in
note
progress.
in this. Yeah, I can. I saw something yesterday. I would laugh for 5 minutes. Here's a BBC questioner saying, with a big picture of Tony Blair, of all things, you know, Tony Blair is getting involved in the Gaza crisis. He's talking with Kushner, and you know, what do you think of that? And she asked one of the people she was interviewing, and she said, "Why do you think Tony Blair is involved?" And this very smart person, a woman, she says, "Well, I already told you he's involved because Satan is unavailable this week." Okay, you got to keep your sense. No, that was the British. Okay, so maybe there are little glimmers of light here. Maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel, even with respect to our mainstream media. We got to keep trying to break in there. I think we're making some successes, and we should look at success.
Yeah, people who are basic now who discuss
Great.
of the session period, you must be registered to get the Zoom link. You can go to the schillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the web page, you will see the link to go and register to get the Zoom. And with that, Dave, please let me know when we've cut the stream, and we'll continue.